Hi, everyone, and welcome to BEaTS Research Radio, a podcast and YouTube channel dedicated to communicating science to the community. My name is Nicole Chu, and I'll be your host on today's episode discussing the translation and commercialization of academic technologies to business with our very special guest, Dr. Heather Sheardown. Dr. Heather Sheardown holds the Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Ophthalmic Biomaterials and is a professor of chemical engineering at McMaster University. Heather has an international reputation for her research on ophthalmic biomaterials, including her innovative work on the development of new materials for the artificial cornea and ophthalmic drug delivery. She is also the scientific director of the C2020 Innovation Hub, funded by the Ontario Research Fund, which specializes in the development and commercialization of biomaterials for drug delivery to mitigate ocular disease. Thanks for joining us, Heather.
You're welcome.
Perfect. So to begin our conversation, could you explain to us some of the current research efforts underway in your laboratory?
Sure. My lab is entirely focused on ocular diseases, treatments with materials as a focus. So we look at drug delivery, we look at tissue engineering, regenerative medicine, replacing tissues. And we look at just materials in general. So on the drug delivery side, how do we get drugs into the back of the eye so that they last longer? On the front of the eye side, how do we adapt an eye drop, which is a notoriously bad way of getting drugs into the eye, to make it so that the drugs last longer and are more efficacious? We've looked at regenerative medicine, particularly in the back of the eye. So how do we deliver cells to the back of the eye and have them integrate and become functional and create functional tissue? And then on just pure materials work, we've done work in contact lenses and intraocular lenses. How do you make them more lubricious? How do you make them more comfortable? How do you make them perform better? So it's all materials based, but everything is ophthalmic.
Thank you so much for sharing. You certainly do a lot of research in the eye, and you have worked with a lot of companies like the current Toronto-based Ripple Therapeutics company to validate their epidural drug delivery technology. So could you explain further for those who may not know what this drug delivery technology is and why it's important?
Yeah, this is a fantastic technology. So for those of us who work in drug delivery, we're used to taking a drug and putting it into some kind of a scaffold, mainly a polymer scaffold. So we put it inside of the scaffold, and then either we take the scaffold away at the end of when all the drug has been released, or the platform itself degrades into presumably innocuous components that the body is able to clear. So what's really neat about the Ripple technology is that there's no polymer, there's no carrier. The drug is actually the drug delivery system. So they found a way of cross-linking the drug to make it the polymer. And what that means is that there's nothing left at the end, but it also means that the kinetics of drug release are really linear. So you get a really long-term release, but at a very constant rate. So with a polymer-based system, typically the release is high initially and then slowly tails off over the course of the release period. But with the Ripple technology, it's really constant over a really long period of time. So they get amazing release kinetics, and they can get amazingly long release durations, 6 months to a year, even in some cases.
Oh, and this long duration, how does this compare to like our current injection duration?
So in the back of the eye, we typically inject quite frequently, actually, once every month, once every 2 months. Sometimes the doctors can go out to once every 3 months. But what that means is that the disease isn't managed in there. And if something flares up, then it can have devastating consequences. So with the Ripple technology being able to release low amounts of drug over 6 months to a year in the back of the eye, we get incredible control of the disease, incredible management, and better patient outcomes. So it's a really, really great technology that I think is going to revolutionize the way we treat ophthalmic conditions.
Wow, that's amazing work you're validating for Ripple Technology. So you have also worked with many other companies like Vistacon, CIBA Vision, and CooperaVision, EyeGate. How does working with a company differ from publishing academic research?
I really like working with companies because the outcomes and the metrics are really clear. So they have a very clear timeline, they have very clear outcomes. So it's very different from academic research because we're not just exploring things, we've actually got a product in mind. And sometimes it doesn't work as well as others. You know, the iGate project, for example, was a great project and it led to some offshoots, but the original technology that we were working on developing just didn't work in the way that they had hoped it would. So there were a couple of other patents that came out of it, but with an academic technology, you know, you kind of go down the road as it develops. So you turn right when something interesting arises, you turn left when something else interesting arises. So it's a little bit more of a meandering path, but with a company, it's very linear. They're looking for very specific outcomes. They're looking to make money, obviously, and they're looking to sell a product. So they have tight timelines and they want results, which again is a lot of fun. And it's really great for the students working on the projects because they get to see how things work in a company, not just how things work in academia.
Oh, so you would you say it's very streamlined and direct towards one goal, working with a company?
There's definitely much more in the way of goals. Milestones are very clear. You know, we have regular meetings with the companies, so typically once a month in lots of cases. But with iGate, for example, we met on a weekly basis. So every week we would bring them up to date with what we had been doing. And you know, some weeks, like with most research, things were slow, or you know, you were synthesizing something, and at the end of the week, you would say, yes, we had this compound that we were synthesizing. But then other weeks there would be lots of results, and we'd have lots to discuss. So very tight timelines and very closely monitored in terms of how the results are being generated.
Oh, that's interesting to hear. So, do you mind walking us through the general process? You mentioned the weekly meetings, but what is the process like going from start to end when commercializing a medical technology in the healthcare field?
Uh, Not linear necessarily, but I think as academics, we're pretty naive about what all is involved. You know, we develop something in the lab and we get some really good results, either in vitro with some cells or in vivo in some animals, and we think we've got a technology here. This is great. But when a company actually goes to commercialize it, then they're thinking about how do we regulate it? You know, how do we get it through the FDA or Health Canada to be able to sell it and make a profit? We need to make sure that it's safe and efficacious in patients. So the distance between, and it's often called the valley of death, between you know an academic paper where you think, okay, we've got something here, and a company actually taking it or moving it forward is much bigger than I ever would have thought. So there's a lot more in the way of animal studies, a lot more in the way of, in the case of drug delivery, pharmacokinetics. So we need to know what the concentration of drug is at various times. We need to make sure that that concentration is never going above a threshold that's going to cause problems. We need to make sure that whatever we're putting in there in terms of a polymer is safe and doesn't cause any adverse side effects. So there's so many things that we would have never thought about um, when we think we've got a really great academic paper, and therefore we're gonna publish it and then we're gonna move it forward. And then there's the whole regulatory process, which we're just getting into with a couple of our technologies now, and that's a whole different game. I mean, just convincing the regulatory agencies to allow you to even put it into patients is a really tricky thing. So it's a lot more involved than I ever would have thought, but it's also really interesting and a lot of fun. I've learned a lot from trying to move these things forward.
Well, so would you say when you were trying to move these things forward, have you faced any obstacles or difficulties when working with companies?
Uh, well, when you're working with a company and they've got a product in mind, they've got a very set path and they know the process. So that's not a huge deal. It's when we're trying to commercialize our own technologies out of the lab that there's so much to learn and we're still trying to figure everything out. So that's where it's a little bit more tricky, in terms of trying to move our own stuff forward instead of trying to move company stuff forward, because once it's at a certain stage from our lab, a company will take it and run with it, and the company knows what they want, so they are giving you very specific milestones to allow them to meet their goals. But when it's our own technology, we have to figure out what those milestones are. And we've gotten way better. We know much more now than we did, 2 years ago or a year ago. But we're still learning, and it's been an incredible journey.
Wow, that's great to hear, a continuous learning process and definitely lots of trial and error. And you are currently the scientific director for the C2020 Innovation Hub. So, do you mind explaining what the C2020 initiative is and why it is important for researchers to develop these academic and industry collaborations?
Yeah, absolutely. So C2020 was born out of an NSERC strategic network. So the NSERC strategic network program really is really academically based. So the idea is to partner researchers with companies, but with early stage work. And we developed a number of technologies through that process. I think there was 32 or something. So you can just imagine, you've got these 32 technologies. What are we going to do with them? Right? We give them to the next PhD student and they go off and they meander down that path on the left-hand side and they do something completely different. So what we did with C2020 was really say, okay, we're going to pick the winners from these 32 technologies and we're going to commercialize them. We're going to focus on creating companies around these technologies. We're going to focus on getting that preclinical data to help us sell them in the marketplace to a company that can then, further develop and figure out the manufacturing and all of that kind of stuff. So that was what C2020 really was about. We had partners and we did some work on their technologies, but we also did a lot of work on some of our own internal technologies to try and move those forward and get them to the point where we could actually sell them and generate capital, and create spin out companies to allow these products to be put into patients. And without funding from the ORF, this wouldn't have been possible because the Ontario Research Fund actually gets it. So they understand what is necessary in order to move things forward, or they understand that what is necessary doesn't exactly fit within the mandate of, a normal CIHR grant or a normal NSERC grant. So they're really flexible about allowing us to do, a lot of the preclinical work that we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So it's just ending shortly. But this was a fantastic funding opportunity for us. And we were able to take 4 separate technologies and move them forward. So different stages. We've got one that's fairly advanced. We've got another that's, a little bit farther back, but we've created different spin out companies and we've had some really good success through this funding. So it's been a fantastic opportunity for us to evaluate whether commercialization of academic technologies is actually possible.
Wow, that's amazing to hear the progress that you've achieved through this initiative. And speaking more on the academic and industry collaborations, why do you think it's important that academic researchers start to commercialize their own technologies?
I think that, just a personal opinion, but I think that there's stuff that comes out of academia that has huge potential to make a big difference in the lives of patients. But the problem is, it's always so early when it comes out of the lab that it just doesn't get to the patient. And as a result, there's all of this opportunity that's being wasted. So by partnering with industry, by, through initiatives like C2020, there are opportunities now, and universities are seeing it more and more, to be able to commercialize some of these things, particularly in the health space, because realistically, the doctors that we're working with are the ones who are on the front lines, and they understand what they need. And often it's just a matter of a conversation. They'll say to us, it would be really great if we could have this. And because we now know what they need, we can develop and define the project around that. So it's just been a fantastic opportunity. And I really do think that this is what is going to lead healthcare in the future.
Yeah, that's great to hear that you're working towards putting these technologies more into practice and translating them into the clinic. Mhm. So thank you so much, Dr. Sheardown, for joining us today and having this very insightful conversation with us.
Thank you. It's always great to talk about this kind of stuff. It's always great to get students aware of what's going on and the opportunities that are out there, because you guys are really the ones that are going to be moving all of this stuff forward eventually.
Mhm. Yeah, that was wonderful sharing with us the translation and your C2020 initiative, and also the different types of companies that you have worked with and the drug delivery technologies that you're currently validating. So thank you all for our BEaTS listeners as well for your time. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram channels at BEaTS Research. BEaTS Research Radio is supported by the Ottawa Heart Institute and the University of Ottawa. We hope to see you all next week. Thank you.